Imagine waking up in your bed tomorrow morning, but something feels wrong. The year on your phone says it's the same day you went to sleep, but you have memories. Vivid, detailed, overwhelming memories of living an entire year in a world nearly 2,000 years in the future. Not dreams, not visions, actual lived experiences. You remember people you met, the streets you walked, the technology you used, the conversations you had. You remember it all with the same clarity as any other memory in your life. And now you're back, and you realize with growing horror that no one will believe you unless you write it down, unless you document every detail before it fades. This isn't a hypothetical. This happened to a Swiss professor named Paul Amadeus Dyanak in 1921. He fell into a mysterious year-long coma, and when he woke up, he claimed his consciousness had lived in the year 3906, and he wrote it all down in a secret diary that he hid from the world. A diary filled with impossible predictions that have come true with terrifying accuracy. A diary that reveals secrets about our future that perhaps we were never meant to know. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you understood about time, consciousness, and the thin line between what has happened and what will happen. May 19th, 1921. A warm spring day in Geneva, Switzerland. Paul Amadeus Dyanak, a 37-year-old language teacher, collapses without warning. His chronic tuberculosis has taken a sudden catastrophic turn. Within hours, he's in a deep coma. His body remains alive, breathing mechanically, heart beating steadily, but his mind is gone, completely unreachable. The doctors at the Geneva hospital have no explanation. They've seen comas before, but something about this one is different. Dyanak's body shows no signs of the usual neurological damage. It's as if his consciousness has simply left, vacated the premises, gone somewhere else entirely. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. His family maintains vigil, but as the months drag on, hope fades. In that era, before modern medical technology, a year-long coma is essentially a death sentence. Even if he wakes up, the assumption is that his mind will be destroyed, that the man who collapses in May 1921 will never truly return. But they keep his body alive. They wait, and somewhere in a place beyond the reach of medical instruments, beyond the physical boundaries of that hospital room, Paul Amadeus Dyanak's consciousness is living a life that shouldn't be possible. Exactly 1 year later, May 1922, Dyanak opens his eyes. The doctors are shocked. There's no medical explanation for his recovery, but what shocks them even more is what happens next. He's not confused about where he is or who he is. He remembers his life before the coma perfectly, but he's agitated, urgent, almost frantic. He demands paper and pen immediately. Before anyone can examine him properly, before the doctors can run their tests, before his family can even celebrate his return, he starts writing. Not random words, not confused rambling. Coherent, detailed, systematic documentation of something he's desperate to record before it slips away. For weeks, then months, Dyanak writes obsessively. He fills notebook after notebook with dense German text. He writes during the day. He writes late into the night. His health is fragile. His tuberculosis still active, but he pushes through exhaustion and pain to get the words down. When people ask what he's writing, he's evasive. Personal reflections, he tells them, notes about his experience. Nothing important. But his urgency tells a different story. This isn't journaling. This is documentation. This is a man trying to preserve something precious and impossible before time takes it away from him. What he's actually writing, what will later be discovered, is a detailed account of living an entire year in the year 3906, not observing it from a distance, not having visions of it, living there. His consciousness, he claims, was somehow displaced from 1921 and inserted into the body of another man nearly 2,000 years in the future. And for 1 year, subjective time that matched exactly with his year-long coma, he lived in that future world. He walked its streets. He spoke with its people. He learned about its history, its technology, its society. He fell in love. He experienced joy and wonder and the profound loneliness of knowing he would eventually have to leave. And then, after exactly 1 year, he woke up back in 1922 in a hospital bed in Geneva, with memories of a world that wouldn't exist for almost 2 millennia. He knows how insane this sounds. He knows that if he tells people the truth, they'll assume the coma damaged his mind. So he keeps the secret. He writes it all down, but he tells no one what the notebooks really contain. He calls his manuscript Chronicles from a Valley, a deliberately vague title that reveals nothing about its true content. The diary becomes a secret, his burden, his gift to a future that might, someday, be ready to understand what he experienced. Now, before we go deeper into what Dianak wrote in his secret diary, I want you to do something. Leave a comment telling me. If you could live 1 year in any point in the future, but you'd have to come back to the present afterward, would you do it? What year would you choose? Think about it. You'd have memories of technologies, of people, of a world that doesn't exist yet. You'd spend the rest of your life knowing what's coming, unable to prove it to anyone. Would the knowledge be worth the isolation? Drop your answer below. Because what happened to Dianak raises profound questions about whether some knowledge is a blessing or a curse. Let's examine what's actually in this secret diary. The manuscript runs several hundred pages, all written in German, all in Dianak's careful, precise handwriting. It's structured chronologically, starting with his confusion upon arriving in the year 3906, continuing through his gradual understanding of this future world, and ending with his return to 1922. But woven throughout the narrative are detailed descriptions of historical events, technological developments, and social transformations that would occur between his time and the far future he visited. Here's where it becomes impossible to dismiss this as simple fantasy. Dianak describes in 1922 a catastrophic global war that would occur in the mid-20th century. Not just any war, a war involving weapons of unprecedented destructive power. He writes about bombs capable of destroying entire cities in an instant, creating devastation on a scale humanity had never seen. Remember, this is 1922. The atomic bomb won't be invented for another 2 decades. Nuclear fission won't even be discovered until 1932. Yet Dianak describes nuclear weapons with disturbing specificity. He talks about the flash of light, the mushroom cloud, the radiation sickness, the long-term contamination, details that wouldn't be public knowledge until after Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. He describes the aftermath of this war, a world divided between 2 superpowers, locked in a tense standoff that would last decades but ultimately end without direct conflict. The Cold War, described 25 years before it began. He mentions a constant threat of annihilation, the arms race, the proxy wars fought in smaller nations while the superpowers never directly engaged. He even suggests the approximate duration, several decades, which matches the actual Cold War period from the late 40s to 1991. But it's the technological predictions that are truly staggering. Dianak writes about small, portable devices that would allow people to see and speak with each other across vast distances. He describes them as fitting in your pocket, with glass screens that display moving images. He talked about accessing vast libraries of information instantly through these devices, about carrying thousands of books, entire music collections, and photographic archives in something the size of a small notebook. In 1922, when he's writing this, telephones are stationary devices connected by wires. Television doesn't exist yet. The radio is cutting-edge technology. Yet he's describing smartphones and tablets with remarkable accuracy. He writes about artificial intelligence. He uses different terminology, calling them thinking machines or mechanical minds. But the concept is clear. He describes machines that can learn, reason, and perform tasks requiring what we would call understanding. He predicts that by the 21st century, these thinking machines will be integrated into every aspect of daily life, helping with everything from communication to transportation to medical diagnosis. He raises concerns about humanity's relationship with these machines, about the philosophical questions of consciousness and intelligence, about the potential dangers of creating thinking entities we might not be able to control. These are exactly the debates we're having right now about AI. A century after he wrote about them, he describes humanity's expansion beyond Earth. Specifically, he writes about Mars. He details the challenges of creating sustainable human settlements on another planet, the decades of preparation required, the technological breakthroughs necessary, and the eventual success of establishing a permanent human presence there. In 1922, this was pure fantasy. The first liquid-fueled rocket wouldn't launch until 1926. Space travel was science fiction. Yet Dianac describes Mars colonization with a timeline that aligns disturbingly well with our current plans and efforts. But here's what makes the secret diary truly extraordinary. Dianac doesn't just list future inventions like a catalog. He describes his personal experience of encountering them for the first time, the confusion, the wonder, the gradual understanding as the people of 3906 explain the principles behind their technology. There's a passage where he describes seeing what he initially thought was magic, people communicating silently with each other across distances, and then learning it was actually direct mind-to-mind communication made possible by implanted neural interfaces. He writes about his emotional reaction to this, the mixture of amazement and unease, the philosophical questions it raised for him about the nature of privacy and individual consciousness. He writes about his relationships in that future world, the people who befriended him, who helped him adjust to a civilization so different from his own. He describes falling in love with a woman there, knowing the relationship was temporary, knowing he would eventually return to his own time and lose her forever. The emotional passages in the diary are heartbreaking. He writes about the pain of loving someone who wouldn't be born for nearly 2,000 years, about the conversations they had about time and fate, and whether their meeting meant anything if it couldn't last. This level of emotional detail is difficult to fabricate. It has the texture of genuine experience, of real loss. The diary also contains extensive descriptions of society of 3906. According to Dianac, humanity had survived multiple near-extinction events and emerged into what he calls a golden age. He describes a unified global civilization that had moved beyond nationalism, war, and economic exploitation. Money, as we understand it, no longer existed. Instead, society was organized around human development, consciousness expansion, and collective well-being. Technology was so advanced that basic material needs, food, shelter, healthcare, were universally provided. People spent their time on creative pursuits, scientific exploration, and what he describes as consciousness development, practices and technologies designed to expand human awareness and potential. He writes about their understanding of time itself. The people of 3906, according to his diary, knew about time travel, not in the sense of physical machines that transport you through time, but in the sense of consciousness displacement. They explained to him that what he was experiencing, his consciousness inhabiting a future body, was a known phenomenon, rare but not unprecedented. They had records of others throughout history who had experienced similar displacements, consciousness from different time periods briefly intersecting with theirs. They understood it as a natural consequence of how consciousness interacts with the structure of space-time, possible under certain extreme neurological conditions. This is where the diary moves from prediction into territory that we can't yet verify. Dianac describes technologies and capabilities that we haven't achieved. Perfect weather control, elimination of all disease, radical life extension, direct mind-to-mind communication, and what he calls consciousness technology, methods expanding and enhancing human awareness that go beyond anything we currently understand. Are these genuine glimpses of our distant future? Or are they the imaginative extrapolations of a brilliant mind experiencing an altered state during a year-long coma? We don't know yet, but the fact that so many of his near-term predictions have proven accurate makes it harder to dismiss the rest as pure fantasy. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Why did Dianac keep this secret? Why didn't he publish the diary during his lifetime? The answer is in the diary itself. In several passages, he expresses his fear of being declared insane. He knows how impossible his story sounds. He knows that in 1922, with no proof, no way to verify his claims, he would be dismissed as delusional or worse. So he writes it all down, but he keeps it hidden. It becomes a secret burden, this knowledge of the future that he can't share without destroying his credibility and his life. In 1924, Dianac's health deteriorates rapidly. The tuberculosis that put him in a coma is killing him. He moves to Athens, Greece, hoping the warmer climate will help. He takes a teaching position there, and among his students is a young man named George Papachatzis. Dianac recognizes something in Papachatsi's intelligence, curiosity, open-mindedness. As Dianac's condition worsens, he makes a decision. He gives his notebooks to Papachatsi's, but he doesn't tell him what they contain. He simply says they're written in German and suggests Papachatsi's use them to practice his language skills. Why this deception? Perhaps Dianac wanted Papachatsi's to discover the truth on his own, to come to his own conclusions without being influenced by Dianac's framing. Perhaps he was still afraid of being thought insane, even on his deathbed. Or perhaps he understood that the diary needed to be translated, preserved, and eventually published, but not yet, not in 1924, when predictions would seem impossible, but later, when enough time had passed that the truth would become undeniable. Paul Amadeus Dianac dies in 1924 at just 36 years old. Papachatsi's keeps the notebooks, intending to use them as his teacher suggested. But when he begins translating them, he realizes these aren't ordinary notes. They're a chronicle of impossible experiences and predictions that, if genuine, would revolutionize our understanding of time and consciousness. He spends decades working on the translation, eventually producing a complete Greek version. But he doesn't publish it immediately. He holds on to it for years, perhaps unsure what to do with such explosive material. It's not until 1972, 48 years after Dianac's death, that Papachatsi's finally publishes the chronicles. By this time, many of Dianac's predictions have already come true. World War II happened. Nuclear weapons exist. The Cold War has been ongoing for decades. Television, computers, and early versions of the technologies Dianac described are becoming commonplace. The diary suddenly seems less like fantasy and more like documented precognition. The publication causes immediate controversy. Skeptics point out that we don't have Dianac's original German notebooks, only Papachatsi's Greek translation. Could Papachatsi's have modified the text after the fact to make it seem more prophetic? It's possible, but several factors argue against it. Papachatsi's was a respected professor of law and philosophy with no apparent motive to create an elaborate hoax. He didn't become wealthy from the publication. He maintained throughout his life that he had translated the text faithfully, without additions or modifications. And crucially, the style and structure of the diary are consistent throughout, showing signs of being written by one person in a continuous process, not assembled piecemeal over decades. Let's consider this from a scientific perspective. How could Dianac have known these things? The skeptical explanation is that he was simply an imaginative fiction writer who happened to make some lucky guesses. But this explanation struggles with the specificity and accuracy of his predictions. Yes, some early 20th century science fiction writers imagined fantastic futures. H.G. Wells wrote about atomic weapons in 1913. But Wells's descriptions were vague and generalized. Dianac's descriptions are specific, detailed, and remarkably accurate, not just about what would be invented, but about when and how and what social consequences would follow. Another skeptical explanation is that Papachatsi's fabricated or heavily edited the diary. But this requires us to believe that Papachatsi's, a man with no background in science or technology, could in the 1940s through 60s predict smartphones, artificial intelligence, and Mars colonization with accuracy that professional futurists couldn't match. That seems even less plausible than taking Dianac's account at face value. So we're left with the possibility that something genuinely anomalous happened during that year-long coma. Not necessarily literal time travel in the science fiction sense, but something that allowed Dianac's consciousness to access information about the future. How? That's where we venture into territory that challenges our understanding of physics and consciousness. Modern quantum physics tells us that time is not what our everyday experience suggests. Einstein's relativity shows that time is relative, that it can slow down or speed up depending on gravity and velocity. Quantum mechanics suggests that causality itself might not always flow in one direction, that effects can precede causes at the quantum level. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the block universe or eternalism, suggest that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, that time is more like a spatial dimension where all moments exist at once. If consciousness has quantum properties, and there's growing scientific interest in quantum theories of consciousness, then perhaps under extreme conditions like a deep coma, Consciousness could become untethered from its normal temporal location. Perhaps it could access information from other points in the temporal structure. This sounds like wild speculation, but it's based on serious physics. The math allows for it. The question is whether it actually happens. Consider this. There are documented cases of people under anesthesia or in near-death experiences reporting accurate information about events happening in other locations. Information they couldn't possibly have known through normal means. These cases exist in medical literature. They're rare, but they're real. The Dianak case might be an extreme version of this phenomenon, where instead of accessing information from distant locations in space, his consciousness accessed information from distant locations in time. Here's what keeps me up at night about this case: the emotional authenticity of the diary. Dianak doesn't write like someone creating fiction. He writes like someone documenting a traumatic and profound experience. He describes the disorientation of waking up in a body that wasn't his, the frustration of not being understood, the gradual adaptation to an incomprehensible world. He writes about friendships formed and lost, about love discovered and abandoned, about the existential weight of knowing you'll return to a time where everyone you've grown to care about doesn't exist yet, and won't for nearly 2,000 years. There's a passage late in the diary where Dianak describes his final days in 3906. He knew he was going to return to his own time. The people there had explained to him that consciousness displacements were always temporary, that his consciousness would eventually snap back to its origin point. He writes about saying goodbye to the woman he loved, about trying to memorize her face because he knew he'd never see her again except in memories. He writes about the unbearable sadness of leaving, mixed with guilt because he also desperately wanted to return to his own time, to his own body, to his own life. This psychological complexity is difficult to fake. And then he describes the moment of return, waking up in a hospital bed, disoriented, not knowing at first where he was, his mind still partly in 3906. The gradual recognition that he was back in 1922, back in his own dying body, back in a world that suddenly seemed primitive and limited after experiencing what humanity would become. An immediate, overwhelming urge to write it all down before it faded like a dream. Except it wasn't a dream. It was memory. Real, lived experience that he desperately needed to preserve. So what do we make of Paul Amadeus Dianak and his secret diary? I can't tell you what to believe. But I can tell you this. A man in 1922 wrote a detailed account of our modern world and accurately predicted technologies, wars, and social changes that wouldn't occur for decades. His diary has been studied, analyzed, and debated for over 50 years. No one has been able to definitively prove it a hoax, but no one has been able to explain how he could have known these things either. The diary exists. You can read it yourself in translation. You can judge its authenticity, its emotional truth, its predictive accuracy. And you can ask yourself the questions it forces us to confront. Is the future already written? Does it exist right now in some form we can't normally access? Could consciousness, under the right conditions, transcend time? And if the answer to any of these questions is yes, what does that mean for everything we think we know about reality, free will, and the nature of existence itself? Think about your own experience of time for a moment. It feels solid, doesn't it? Past, present, future in a fixed sequence. But what if that's an illusion? What if time is more like space, where all moments exist simultaneously, and we only experience it sequentially because of how our consciousness moves through it? What if the year 3906 is already out there, already real, already happening in some sense, just separated from us by temporal distance the way Australia is separated from you right now by spatial distance? If that's true, then what Dianak experienced wasn't traveling to the future, but accessing a future that already exists. His consciousness didn't move forward in time, so much as it moved to a different location in the temporal landscape. And if that happened once, if the boundaries of time proved permeable in his case, then it could happen again. It might be happening more often than we realize, in subtler ways, through dreams or intuitions or déjà vu, brief moments when consciousness brushes against other temporal locations. Here's my final thought. Whether you believe Dianak literally lived in 3906, or whether you think something else happened during that coma, something we don't yet have the science to explain, the result is the same. We have a document created in the early 1920s that describes our world with uncanny accuracy, that predicts our present and hints at our future. That was kept secret, not published for profit or fame, but preserved by a dying man who felt compelled to document what he experienced, even knowing most people would think him insane. That document is Paul Amadeus Dianaka's gift to us, a glimpse of where we might be heading, a warning about challenges we'll face, a promise that if we survive, we might achieve something beautiful. And regardless of how he obtained this knowledge, the knowledge itself is valuable. The diary makes us think about time differently, about consciousness differently, about the possibilities lurking at the edges of what we understand. So I'll ask you one more time, what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Dianak lived in the year 3906? Or do you have another explanation? And if you could read one chapter from his secret diary, one detailed description of something from that distant future, what would you want to know about? What part of humanity's future are you most curious about? If this investigation expanded your understanding of what might be possible, hit that like button. It helps others discover content that challenges assumptions and explores mysteries. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into cases like this, into phenomena that suggest reality is stranger and more flexible than we've been taught. Because there are more stories out there, more impossible diaries, more unexplained experiences that hint at depths of mystery we're only beginning to explore. Paul Amadeus Dianak fell into a coma in 1921, lived a year in 3906, returned in 1922, and wrote it all down in a secret diary before dying at 36. That diary survived. It was translated, it was published, and now we can read it and judge for ourselves. But here's what I know for certain. A century later, we're still trying to explain how he knew what he knew. And that means something. It means the mystery is real, the questions are important, and the answers, whatever they turn out to be, will change everything we think we understand about time, consciousness, and reality itself. Thank you for watching. Thank you for questioning. And I'll see you in the next exploration of the impossible.